Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Quarles, for your appearance here today. I want to speak to you about FINRA Rule 4210. 2 years ago, I sent a letter to the SEC expressing concern about this rule, which established margin requirements on to-be-announced securities such as mortgage-backed bonds. The key problem here is that Rule 4210 applies to broker-dealers but not to banks. Thus, broker-dealers can use their banking arm to evade the requirement, which can create an unfair and uneven playing field. Earlier this week, Federal Reserve staff confirmed with my advisor that this is a potential inequity, and I would say there are Arkansas firms that will simply exit the market if this uneven playing field comes to pass. Do you share my concern about this matter?
So I would say that certainly as a general principle, a level playing field is important, and that's across a range of issues, whether it's banks and broker-dealers, big banks and small banks, domestic banks and international banks. So it's a pretty high priority for us as regulators to try to ensure that our regulatory system creates a level playing field. On the specific issue of the FINRA rule you're citing, I'm only now becoming familiar with it, but am very engaged in understanding how it's affecting that level playing field.
Okay. Rule 4210 is one of those final rules not yet in effect, which both the SEC and the Federal Reserve has the ability to alter. Can I get your commitment to take a review of it and to ensure that it doesn't create an unequal playing field between smaller broker-dealers and larger bank-affiliated firms?
We'll certainly review it through that lens, yes.
Thank you. Let's look now to the international system, specifically the Financial Stability Board, or FSB. In January, I sent a letter along with several other members of this committee to President Trump raising my concerns that went to many other members of the administration, including yourself. I'm sure it's right at the top of your mind.
Actually, it is.
Just in case it's not, I will say that I am worried that the FSB has morphed from an advisory organization into a global regulatory body and using quasi-enforcement tools. A couple months ago, Secretary Mnuchin testified that FSB is in fact an advisory organization and that its rules are voluntary, not binding. Do you agree that the FSB rules are voluntary?
Yes, I do.
In 2015, 4 Chinese banks sought an exemption from an FSB rule related to how much capital they hold. Can you imagine a scenario in which a United States firm would ever have to seek an exemption from an advisory role of the FSB?
No.
2013, the FSB determined that 2 large American insurers were globally, systemically important insurers. Those 2 insurers, though, had not yet been designated as systemically important financial institutions in the United States. That creates an unusual circumstance in which the FSB, which operates by consensus to include U.S. government officials, had determined that U.S. firms were globally systemic, yet those same U.S. officials had not determined that they were systemic in our nation itself. I suspect the Trump administration would have a slightly different approach to this matter, but what can we do to ensure that future administrations do not take such strange steps in which they are acting through the FSB to achieve results on regulating U.S. firms that they have not yet taken under U.S. law?
So, I mean, the FSB designations are purely advisory. It's up to national authorities in any particular country to implement them, and we have our FSOC process through which that would be done. And the FSB, advisory stance doesn't really affect the FSOC process. I think the larger question, though, that you're raising is an important one, which is I do think that we. In our engagement in these international fora, the FSB, the Basel Committee, I think is very important because I think trying to ensure a level playing field for our globally active institutions is in their interest, it's in our national interest. But we need to ensure that we are fully engaged with all of the various stakeholders in our country as we go into those national fora and represent a broad range of views as opposed to a narrow range of views.
Thank you. I agree with that. It's important to stay engaged to ensure that we have fair and equal playing fields overseas. It's also important to ensure that U.S. sovereignty prevails in the regulation of our financial institutions, to include large financial institutions, which have not just rich bankers at their top, but lots of clerks and secretaries and delivery personnel and tellers and everything else spread around the country whose jobs may depend on the United States getting a fair and level playing field overseas, as well as not having overseas advisory institutions stretch their regulatory hands inside of our borders. Thank you, Mr. Quarles.
Thank you, Senator.